the mud, the mead, and the midden, morning in a Tudor village c. 1522. Imagine waking in the cold before dawn, not to an alarm, but to the faint crackling of a dying hearth and the low grumble of your own stomach. The year is 1522. You are not royalty, not even a tradesman, but a lowly peasant, perhaps a copyholder, if you're lucky, living in a thatched cottage or a small village in Norfolk. There is no such thing as leisure, no real privacy, and certainly no plan for upward mobility. Your only objective: survive the day. The walls around you are of wattle and daub-woven wooden strips covered in a sticky mixture of mud, straw, and dung. In the depths of winter, the cold seeps through them like fog through hedgerows. You sleep on a straw mattress, shared with others in your family, children, spouse, perhaps even livestock. On colder nights, before the first cockcrow, someone has to tend the fire. Fire is life. It cooks your food, boils your water, and keeps your only room bearable. If the coals have died overnight, restarting the fire will mean striking flint and steel, or begging a neighbor for a live coal. Wrapped in moss and carried quickly, the first tasks of the day. There is no breakfast as we understand it. Food is not plentiful or taken for granted. If you're fortunate, you'll have coarse rye bread, hardened from yesterday. Maybe some alias. Even in the morning, water is too dangerous. It carries fevers, bile, and death. Weak ale is safer, and everyone drinks it, men, women, and children alike. Your village likely has a communal oven, fired once or twice a week. Baking day is a serious affair, often one of the few social activities aside from church. Until then, meals are plain and cold: bread, maybe porridge. The porridge is made from oats or barley boiled with water, perhaps thinned with a bit of sour whey if you have a cow. You might add leeks or onions, whatever's left over from the kitchen garden. You step outside to relieve yourself, not in a bathroom, of course, but behind the midden heap, a pile of decomposing waste, ash, animal dung, and the occasional pig skull. It stinks, but this is just part of life. The midden fertilizes your small plot of land, cold at aft, and nothing is wasted. Dutch shoes, if you have them, are stiff leather, often soaked and cracked. They do little to keep out the damp. More often than not, you go barefoot in warmer months, your feet calloused from years of work. The daily grind, literally, the grain you eat must be ground. While wealthier households can pay to use the Lord's mill, you may own a quern, a small, hand-turned grinding stone. Turning grain into meal by hand is backbreaking, monotonous labor. It takes time, and time is a luxury you rarely have. Women and children often perform these tasks. A young girl might spend hours kneeling on the floor, turning the upper stone until her arms ache. The resulting flour is rough, full of husk, and produces dark bread, hard on the teeth and sometimes laced with weevils, but you eat it anyway. While some peasants hold land, often a few strips in open fields, others are cotters or laborers, working other men's land for scraps or coin. Most land is still governed by manorial law. You are not quite free, and not quite bound. Your survival depends on understanding obligations, tithes to the church, labor owed to the Lord, rents, fees, and all the many small permissions that define your rights. You know your place in the hierarchy. You know not to question it. Work, work, and more work if it's spring or summer. The day will be filled with ploughing, planting, or harvesting, depending on the season. You'll use a heavy wooden plough, perhaps shared with other villagers. Oxen are costly. If you have access to them, it's probably through communal arrangements. In winter, there is less field work, but no less labor. You must mend fences, gather firewood, thatch roofs, feed animals, and prepare for the next planting season. Survival is a year-round occupation. Every task is physical. Every tool is handmade. Every mistake could mean ruin. Lunch is small, if it exists at all, maybe cheese, if your goat is still producing milk. Perhaps pickled vegetables from the last harvest, sour cabbage, or dried beans. Meat is rare. Most peasants eat meat only a few times a year, often during feasts or when an animal dies unexpectedly. The Lord may demand labor days, when you work his fields instead of your own. You cannot refuse. Your labor is not entirely your own. The world outside your village, the world beyond the hedgerows, is mostly rumor. You hear news from the church or from passing traders. You've heard the King Henry VIII is taking a new wife. Or maybe he's dissolved some monasteries. It matters little. Your concerns are local: the harvest, the weather, the health of your cow. Still, there's a sense of unease. The church bells ring more often these days. A neighbor whispers that a tax collector is coming. You remember the last time they came. They measured your belongings, your chickens, your cart, even your Lederland demanded coin. You had to borrow from your cousin to pay it. You are still repaying him in oats. Children, rolls, and rest children are not spared from labor. By the age of 7, they are working alongside you, watching livestock, scaring crows from the barley fields, gathering wood. There is no such thing as adolescence in the modern sense. Only small workers and larger ones. Your spouse is as worn as you. Marriage is less about love and more about survival. A strong back, a good harvest, a healthy child, that is what matters. You end the day as you began, near the fire. There is no real light, but the fire or a tallow candle, which sputters and stinks. You may listen to a neighbor's story, or sing an old folk tune, or you may sit in silence, stitching a torn tunic or mending a fence post. And as you lie down again, with aching limbs and a rumbling stomach, you may wonder what would happen if the harvest failed, if the pig died, if the Lord raised the rent. You drift into an easy sleep with the question lingering, like smoke from the hearth. What would you do if tomorrow brought nothing but hunger? As the morning sun pushes weakly through the low cloud cover, you rise again from your crouch by the well. You've already carried 2 heavy buckets of murky water back to the cottage, your back aching slightly from the strain. Water gathering is a daily ordeal, and you always hope it hasn't been fouled by runoff from the nearby midden heap. But beggars cannot choose their water sources. It's midday now, or near enough. You don't own a clock. The bells from the church tower are a ring out the canonical hours, and you guess from the light. Most peasants do. It's not that time is meaningless, but that it exists in a different rhythm, one shaped by seasons, harvests, and hunger, not minutes and seconds. By this point, your workday is far from over. In fact, it's only just getting serious. By now, you're likely out in the open field system, long, narrow strips of land divided among the villagers. You may work a few strips of your own if you're a tenant or copyholder, but more often than not, you labor on someone else's behalf. The manor, the church, or a local noble. Tudor England still functions, in many parts, on a semi-feudal structure. Yes, the Black Death has shaken things up. Yes, some peasants have earned more freedom since the 14th century. But lords still own most of the land, and peasants like you owe them labor in exchange for using even the smallest scrap of earth. Day's work could involve harrowing, sowing seed by hand, or maintaining the stone boundary markers. On rare occasions, you may be called to dig drainage ditches or repair hedgerows on the village boundary. You're always aware of who's watching. The reeve, perhaps, a local man, one of your own, chosen to keep order and oversee work. He has little power, but enough to report laziness to the bailiff. And that could mean a fine, or worse, the loss of land use. Food. If there is any you break for your midday meal on the edge of a field, there's no time or custom for eating at a table. There may not even be one in your home. Sitting in the mud with a chunk of coarse bread, you chew slowly, methodically. Every bite counts. You might eat cold pottage, a sort of porridge thickened with beans, peas, or whatever greens haven't gone yellow in the larder. If it's winter, your meal could be even bleaker, perhaps only a weak ale, and a heel of stale bread soaked in it to make it soft enough to swallow. Some households share meat only on feast days. If you're unusually lucky, or have a relative who traps small game. A bit of rabbit or bird might be shared, often boiled into a thin broth with roots and leeks. Meat is both precious and suspicious. Many fast days and religious observances restrict it, and spices, sugar, those are things for nobles, for city people. In your world, flavor comes from salt. When you have enough to preserve the food before it rots, the stink of the village, go back to work after this sparse lunch, stomach half full, thoughts trailing to next year's barley. But always around you is the smell, not a single bad scent, but a mix of them. It's the smoke from peat fires, the human waste from chamber pots dumped into ditches, the piles of decaying offal near the butcher's post, the commons and the lord's land. There's no organized sanitation. Pigs root freely in the street. Children relieve themselves in corners, and though the church promotes cleanliness as godly, soap is expensive. What little washing you do is in cold water, and usually just hands, face, and maybe feet. Toilets, if they exist, are wooden privies built over shallow pits. More often, waste is tossed in a trench behind the home, sometimes covered with straw. If your village is lucky, a gong farmer may be hired once or twice a year to clear the cesspits. But mostly, the muck accumulates. Illness spreads easily. Diarrhea and fevers come often. Coughs linger all winter. Child mortality is high. As many as half may die before age 5. You've lost siblings. Everyone has. Death is always part of the village background, as ordinary as rain, the church, the calendar, and the land. Despite all this, there's structure. The church is the center of both spiritual and social life. The year is divided by the liturgical calendar. Lent, Michaelmas, Advent, feasts and saints' days punctuate the drudgery, even when there's nothing to feast with. These religious observances also determine what you eat and when. During Lent, for instance, meat is forbidden. Fish is allowed, but only if you can afford it, or live near a river with passable fishing. Eel and herring are the most common, often dried or salted. The tithe, a tenth of your produce or profit, must be paid to the church, no matter how small your crop. The priest receives his share. Failure to pay could lead to excommunication or legal trouble. Meanwhile, the manor demands its own share. Rents are rarely paid in coin, more often in labor, produce, or goods. You may owe boon work extra labor, or harriet, a death duty paid when a tenant dies, sometimes in the form of their best animal. You are entangled in layers of obligation, most of which have no written record, only memory and tradition. And tradition is hard to argue with. The hidden labor of women while men toil in the fields. Women work constantly in the home. They spin wool, cook, raise children, mend clothing, brew ale, preserve food, and tend gardens. Much of this labor is invisible, unrecorded, but no less vital. Brewing, in particular, is often a woman's task. Before commercial alehouses became common, households brewed their own weak ale for everyday use. Women who excel at it may become alewives, selling their product to neighbors. Some even prosper briefly, until male guilds begin pushing them out. Childbirth is dangerous. With no doctors and only midwives, often untrained, many women die giving birth. Others suffer long-term injuries. Infants die often, too. Naming a child may be delayed, for fear they won't survive. Still, life goes on. Women know how to dry herbs, use willow bark for fevers, and apply poultices of morse and vinegar. They pass this knowledge down, not through books, but stories and practice. And they endure, quietly, always. The unexpected visitor. Summertimes, a traveler arrives, a peddler, or maybe a priest returning from pilgrimage. Everyone gathers to listen. News travels slowly. The village is its own closed world, and visitors are rare. Today, it's a bailiff from the manor estate. He rides in with papers and demands, speaking in formal tones. He wants a list of your livestock. He's assessing rents again. You feel your stomach tighten. Last winter was hard. Your sow lost her litter. You don't know how you'll pay. Others grumble too. One neighbour had to sell his tools to cover last year's dues. Another was forced to give up his ox. The entire rhythm of the village pulses with anxiety. Will the Lord raise your fees? Will you be fined for using too much of the common wood? And what of the rumours? That land is being enclosed, fenced off for sheep, for profit. You've heard stories of men pushed out, cottages torn down, fields locked behind wooden gates. Could it happen here? You don't know. You don't want to find out. A dull but durable resilience still. You press on. You mend a gatepost with an old iron nail. You barter half a sack of beans for a small bag of salt. You patch your son's shoes with leather from a ruined belt. Everything is reused, repurposed, preserved. Nothing is wasted. Even leisure is work adjacent. When the fields rest, you clean tools. When food is short, you scavenge for mushrooms or roots. Even church festivals mean days of preparation, baking, carrying benches, and providing labour for processions. And when night begins to fall, a soft grey light stretching across the fields, you trudge back toward your cottage. Your feet ache, your fingers are cracked, but you have survived another day. Another utterly ordinary, uneventful, and quietly heroic day. But as the hearth flickers back to life and the door creaks shut behind you, you begin to wonder, what happens when survival isn't enough? What happens when even the quiet routines begin to break? The hearth is dim now, glowing only with embers. You sit close, a woolen blanket pulled around your shoulders, patched so many times it's more mend than fabric. Outside, the air has thickened with the scent of wet soil and distant wood smoke. Another Tudor day has ended, much like the one before it, but under the surface of these routine hours, under the rising steam of the pottage, under the clack of handlooms, beneath the earth where your roots and barley grow, the world is shifting. Slowly, dull as mud, yet irreversibly. You wouldn't call it history. It's just your life. But later, others will look back and call this a turning point. Trouble brewing in the fields. You wake the next day to whispers in the lane. There's talk of a fence going up on the far side of the village, across what used to be open grazing land. No one asked permission. It simply appeared. The timber was dragged in under cover of night. The word enclosure has been slipping into more and more conversations lately. Whispered, grumbled, sometimes spat. Enclosure means fencing of common land, the land that, by age-old custom, anyone in the village might graze animals on or collect firewood from. But as wool grows more profitable, landlords are converting open fields into enclosed pastures for sheep. They rent the fields to wealthy graziers, peasants like you. You're left with less, or nothing. You once had a narrow strip of barley in the south field. Now, it's behind a wooden fence, and the man from the next county has laid claim to it. Your pig can't feed there. Your right to gather brushwood has vanished overnight. There's no formal hearing, no discussion. The manorial court upholds the landlord's right. You never stood a chance. The slow displacement. You aren't alone. All across Tudor England, especially in the Midlands and East Anglia, peasants are being pushed from the land. Tenants are evicted. Villages shrink. Some disappear altogether. Just grass and stone where people once lived. Sometimes it starts with a single family being forced out. They travel, hoping to find work in a nearby town, only to join hundreds of others doing the same. The irony is bitter. Your ancestors have lived on this land for generations. Their bones lie in the churchyard. Yet, without legal title, without parchment proving ownership, your claim means nothing, and so the world contracts. Your options narrow. Will you stay and struggle, hoping for a better harvest, or join the stream of the displaced, heading toward towns swollen with beggars and thieves? Even wandering requires permission. Laws against vagrancy grow harsher every decade. If you're caught traveling without a master or a written pass, you may be whipped, branded, or pressed into forced labor. A peasant's rebellion, quiet, then loud. Some peasants try to resist. They tear down fences at night. They petition the king In the late 15th and early 16th centuries, there are localized riots, not bloody revolutions, but noisy defiance. In 1549, long after your imagined day in the field, the Kett's Rebellion will erupt in Norfolk, a protest against enclosures led by a yeoman named Robert Kett. He'll briefly take control of Norwich with thousands of followers, demanding land reform, fair rents, and the end of landlord abuses. But even rebellions fade. Kett will be captured, tried, and hanged. Landlords will regain control, and the fences will keep rising. Still, even in your time, you feel the tension. Everyone walks with heads a little lower. The gossip is more bitter. The future feels less stable than it once did, even if the weather hasn't changed. Cities and the pull of the unknown. Some villagers pack up and head to London. It's growing rapidly, from 50,000 in the late 1400s to over 200,000 by the end of the Tudor period. It's a different world there. Narrow streets, guilds and apprenticeships, taverns and printing presses. The plague comes more often, yes, but so does opportunity. Some become servants. Some sell goods in the markets. A few, by sheer fortune or cunning, rise above their station. You consider it sometimes. Life here is hard, but at least you know its rhythm. Would a life in the city be better, or just another kind of drudgery? The thought fades as you chop wood. For the evening fire, you still have obligations here. A roof over your head, a child who needs feeding, a neighbor who shares your tools, but you feel something old slipping away, a tether to the land that once defined every moment of your life. The Reformation, faith turned inside out. It's not just the land that's changing, the very foundation of faith is shaking beneath your feet. In 1534, King Henry VIII breaks from the Catholic Church and declares himself head of the Church of England. At first, it means little to you, just another royal whim. But soon the changes come home. Statues in your church are removed. The Latin Mass is translated into English. The saints' days are fewer. The local monastery, once a source of alms and assistance, is dissolved. Its stones are carted off. The poor no longer find bread there. You hear mutterings in the tavern. Some say the old ways were better. Others embrace the new services. Most stay silent. Saying the wrong thing can bring suspicion, and suspicion is dangerous. You once found comfort in the steady cycle of feast and fast. Now even that is in question. Faith has become political, and you, a peasant with little education, are caught in the middle. What remains throughout all of this? Daily life continues. You still rise early to tend the hearth. You still patch your children's clothes. You still mend fences and watch the clouds for signs of frost. When someone dies, and they often do, you light candles and murmur prayers, old ones you aren't sure are still allowed. You teach your children how to plant turnips, how to braid, twine, how to keep bees. You pass on knowledge not through books, but habits. You teach them how to survive, even if you can't promise they'll thrive. You watch the seasons turn. You watch the fields narrow. You watch the Lord's house grow larger, and the village grow smaller, but you endure, always. A final reflection, survival, not glory. History won't remember your name. No statue will be raised in your honor. You'll be buried beneath a stone, too small to last more than a generation. No chronicler will note how you boiled rainwater to save your child from dysentery, or how you shared your last apple with a beggar, or how you held fast when the fences closed in, but still, you mattered. Because survival in Tudor England was never guaranteed. It was a choice you made every day, often without realizing it. Through patience, through labor, through the small, quiet acts of living, you helped build the world that would come after. And though your life was hard, ordinary, even dull, it was also full of meaning. Every furrow you plowed, every seed you sowed, helped lay the groundwork for centuries of change. And so, when we think of the Tudor period, we often think of kings and queens, of palaces and politics, but maybe we should also think of you, the candlemaker's apprentice. A life by wax and wick smell hits you first, not sharp, like rotting fish or mildew. No, it's something heavier, greasy, like meat that's been cooked too long and forgotten. You breathe through your mouth at first, but eventually, you give up and let the scent settle in. This is the candle workshop. Your master, a thin man with sinewed arms and burned scars on his forearms, calls it the candler's house, but it isn't much more than a stone-floored room behind a narrow shop front, tucked between a butcher and a tanner in a street that rarely sees sunlight. You're 12. You've just been taken on as an apprentice, bound by your father's word and a small coin fee, and you'll serve for 7 years, a flame for the faithful in medieval Europe, especially around the 13th to 15th centuries. Candles are not a luxury, they are a necessity. The sun sets early in winter. Churches must remain lit for evening vespers, monks need light to copy manuscripts, and every noble household, even the modest ones, expects light after dusk. Oil lamps are used in warmer regions, but here, in your damp, cool corner of northern Europe, candles rule. Fire is precious and dangerous, and the only source of light after the sky darkens. The candle maker is not a revered craftsman, but he is needed. There are 2 kinds of candles you'll learn to make: tallow and beeswax. Beeswax is sweet-smelling, slow-burning, and gives off a clean flame. It's used in churches, ceremonies, and wealthy homes, but it's expensive. Wax is precious and imported or collected in limited quantities from local beekeepers. Tallow, on the other hand, is what you will come to know intimately. It's made from the rendered fat of sheep or cows, and it stinks. Boiling the beast. Our first week is spent fetching. You gather wood for the fire, draw water from the communal well, and carry heavy tubs of tallow from the back alley. These arrive in congealed lumps, grey and fatty, or from crawling with flies if they've been stored too long. Once the tallow is rendered, a boiling process that fills the shop with steam and the reek of fat, it's strained, cooled, and prepared for dipping. You will spend many hours doing nothing but dipping. You take a wick, often made of flax or hemp, and dip it into a vat of molten tallow. You pull it out, let it cool slightly, then dip it again. Over and over, sometimes 20, 30 times, until a candle is formed. It's slow, rhythmic, hot, and the work never stops. In the winter, your hands go red from the cold between dips. In summer, you sweat so much you leave fingerprints in soft wax. And always, your skin absorbs the smell. By the end of your first month, you no longer notice it. But others do. You're not allowed to sit with your family at church. The village girls wrinkle their noses when you pass, but they light your candles just the same. Rules of the Flamith Guild controls your trade. In cities, candle makers are part of a guild of chandlers, a powerful trade organization that dictates quality, pricing, and where you can sell. You're only allowed to sell candles within your parish limits. Selling outside that boundary can result in fines or worse. Your master shows you the measuring rod, an iron tool used to test candle length. Any candle shorter than the approved size is rejected. Wax candles are tested even more harshly. Fraud, mixing tallow into pure wax candles, is severely punished. Once, a man in London was jailed for doing just that. You don't question the guild. They protect your trade. But they also make it nearly impossible for you to rise above your station. You will be an apprentice 4 years, then, perhaps, a journeyman, and only if you're lucky or wealthy will you ever afford the fee to become a master with your own mark. Your master's mark, a simple crescent etched into the bottom of each finished candle, identifies his work in the market stalls. If a candle drips too much, burns poorly, or smokes, buyers will remember the mark. His reputation depends on it. So, in turn, does yours. The cost of light people today might take for granted the flick of a switch, but in your time, a single candle is a cost. Most families can't afford to burn more than 1 or 2 candles per evening. They dine quickly after dusk. Children are sent to bed early. Work that requires sight is done by the window. During daylight, a pound of tallow yields about 8 to 10 candles, enough to burn for perhaps 80 hours. And yet, tallow itself is costly. It must be bought from butchers, stored properly, and boiled in copper pots that can easily scorch. Beeswax candles are sold individually and reserved for the church. The bishop's residence alone orders over 100 per month. For feast days, dozens more are required. The holy must be seen, after all, and in a world of darkness, to be seen is to be blessed. The dangers you can't see's not the boiling tallow that gets you, or the dull knives used to trim wicks. It's the fire your master's predecessor burned to death. A loose sleeve, a moment of distraction. That's all it took. Candle shops across Europe have gone up in flames for centuries. Entire neighborhoods have been destroyed. That's why every night you douse the hearth with sand. You double-check every smoldering wick, and yet you know it's just luck. Bad breath from a drunken customer, a spark caught in old thatch, luck, or the lack of it. Quiet pridey despite the sting and the burns and the mockery. You grow to feel pride in your trade. You begin to recognize subtle differences in wick types. You notice how tallow from older animals burns slower. You learn to control the temperature of the dipping pot by the color of its smoke. You begin to dip 2 wicks at once, then 4. Soon, your candles burn evenly, drip less, and flicker less in drafty holes. Your master grunts his approval once, and that's all you need. You begin to dream of owning your own mark, your own stall, perhaps even a shop near the cathedral, where bishops order by the dozen and the wax is white as linen. But the journey is long, and the nights are longer. Final thought. What is a life lit only by fire? As you clean the floor by candlelight, the waxy glow flickering in the small room, you wonder, how much of life do most people miss, simply because it's too dark to see? Would your life be different if light were free? Would people work later, love longer, read more? Would you still be worth something if anyone could summon light with the press of a hand? You press the question down like a wick, burying it under layers of molten fat. It is not for you to know. Your work is to light the world for others. By the end of your 2nd year, your fingertips are permanently slick, not wet, but polished, like old leather, hardened by wax and heat and splinters of wood that never come out. You no longer flinch when hot tallow splashes your arm. You don't gag when cleaning the rendering vat. You've learned to live with the smell, and worse, to stop noticing it. You are no longer the new boy. A younger apprentice has arrived, a 7-year-old named Martin, whose first task is to sweep the ash and rat droppings from under the woodpile. You remember how scared you were, and tired, and sore. He is all those things now. It's strange how quickly you've become part of the shop's foundation, like a stall, or the kettle, or the ledgers you can now just barely read. But the work continues. Tallying by drip, and wick in many towns and cities. Candle makers weren't just craftspeople, they were also accountants of light. Every candle had to meet regulations, uniform length, minimum weight, proper burn quality. The guild sent inspectors to larger towns, men who could fine a shop for using off wax or cutting wick lengths too short. Even a slightly shortened candle might deprive a church of its full service time or cause a noble's dinner to end in darkness. Your master teaches you to keep a wax ledger, a dull book of dates and quantities. 3 dozen tallow to Sir Edridge, 12 wax, beeswax stamped, to the parish office. A full moon's order of fat cakes from the butcher. You now know that the economy of your village, and many others, runs on dozens of small, hidden industries like this. You are just one cog, helping to push light into a world that always wants to stay dark. A visit from the wax merchant one day. In the early spring, a man arrives wearing an oiled cloak and speaking with a Flemish accent. He deals in beeswax, and comes bearing bricks of it wrapped in linen, stamped with the emblem of a monastery from across the sea. This is not common wax. It's pristine, golden white wax that smells faintly of flowers and smoke. Your master nods solemnly. This wax is precious. It will be used only for the cathedral's altar candles. Making these is different from tallow. Work. The wax must be heated gently in a copper pot, not iron, or a wood discolor. Wicks must be triple braided. The dipping must be precise and even, and the candles left to cool in still air, no drafts. Any imperfection, any sag, bubble, or seam, and the wax must be melted again and started over. You are allowed to assist, but not to dip. You carry wax to the bench. You trim the cord ends. You count the number of candles to be boxed. Each one costs more than a month's food for your family. It's the first time you truly understand. There is a hierarchy of light, not just between wax and tallow, but between who gets to enjoy the glow and who must labor to create it. Life beyond the shop door. You live above the candle shop, in a small shared room with your fellow apprentices. In winter, it's cold enough to freeze water in a cup. You sleep 3 to a quart, head to foot, rotating which end gets the blanket. The window has no glass, only wax parchment that keeps out the rain, but not the cold. You wake before dawn. You clean, stir the pots, and help open the shutters. In the late evenings, you sometimes sneak out and wander the street by lantern light. You notice something peculiar. People see you, but not you. They recognize the smell of the candle shop, the soot stains on your cuffs, and your scorched apron. But no one asks your name. Only once does someone truly stop you. An old woman, selling rushlights, cheaper versions of candles, made from the pith of rush plants, soaked in fat. She holds one up and says, "Not everyone can afford your master's fancy tapers." You realize she's right. For all your labor, most of your candles go to churches and manor houses. The poor buy rushlights, or burn wood, or simply go without. Some save their candle ends in jars, melting them together to stretch out a few more nights. You begin to wonder, who is candlelight truly for? Learning by fire. When your master finally lets you dip wax for church candles, you are nervous. Your hands shake slightly. The wax must be heated to exactly the right consistency, to hot, and it runs thin, to cool, and it won't coat. You follow his motions carefully. Dip, raise, turn, cool. Dip again. The wax thickens with each repetition, building smooth cylinders of ivory. By now, your hands know the rhythm. You breathe in the scent, lighter than tallow, almost sweet. Then, a mistake. Your sleeve grazes the pot. You drop the wick. It splashes, coating your palming wax. You don't cry out. You simply pull away, flex your fingers as the wax hardens, and bite your tongue. Your master doesn't speak. But later, he shows you how to hold the wick differently, using your thumb and third finger, not the forefinger. Less chance of slipping. In his own way. That is praise. The festival of lights a year. In the dead of winter, the town celebrates the feast of the purification, also called Candlemas. On this day, every person carries a lit candle in a slow procession through the streets. It is meant to drive out darkness, bless the new year, and honor the Virgin Mary. Even the poorest receive a candle, sometimes donated by your shop. You and your fellow apprentices are tasked with preparing over 200 candles for the church and procession. It takes weeks. On the day itself, you watch the line of people pass. Some carry their candle proudly, others shield it against the wind, desperate to keep it from flickering out before they reach the church door. There is no greater display of your work than this. An entire town lit by the labor of your hands, and yet you watch from the side of the road, without a candle of your own. You're not a member of the congregation, not yet. You're a servant of the flame, tools of the trade be now. You know your tools better than your own face. The wick wheel, for twisting and measuring strands. The dipping rod, made from ash wood and hung on pegs to dry. The wax knife, with its dull edge, not for cutting, but trimming cold ends. The branding iron, used to press the maker's mark into each finished candle. You learn to spot flaws quickly, bubbles, uneven tapering, weak wicks. A good candle stands firm, burns clean, and drips only underwind. You also begin to understand the strange chemistry of your work, though no one calls it chemistry. Wax softens, but does not boil. Tallow melts fast and catches fire easily. Wick thickness controls how fast a candle burns. Shorter wicks make brighter flames. Longer ones smolder. The science of flame is not written in books here. It's written in scars, soot, and smoke. Small brightnesses are small moments of joy. Sometimes, you sneak leftover wax to make your own tiny candle ends. They burn only a few minutes, but they are yours. You find ways to decorate the base, with a pressed seed or a wax twist. You give one to the kitchen girl across the alley. She smiles, then laughs. Even a candle maker needs someone to light the way, she says. Your face turns hot, but not from the fire. These moments are rare, but they remind you, even in a life shaped by heat and grease and hard hours, you are still a person, not just a pair of hands. A question in the shadow-sown night. You find your master sitting in the workshop long after closing. The fire is low, the air cold. He's holding a beeswax candle, watching the flame. He doesn't notice you at first. Then he speaks, spent my whole life making light for other people, he says. Still can't see past the end of my own nose. He laughs quietly, then snuffs the candle and walks upstairs. You sit in the dark, listening to the tick of cooling wax, the creak of the rafters, and the hum of silence. You wonder, if a man spends his whole life making light, does he ever get to step into it himself? You are now 15. Years have passed in the rhythm of wick and wax. The dipping stick no longer blisters your fingers. You can gauge wax temperature by scent alone. You sleep in the apprentice loft only one night in 5, choosing instead to curl up by the workbench, soot smudging your collar, dreaming of flame. And soon, your time as an apprentice will end. But endings are rarely clean. They do not announce themselves with trumpets or bells. They arrive like ash, slow, soft, and impossible to sweep away entirely. A funeral by candlelight bell tolls one February morning, low and heavy. You are called to help prepare the chapel. A parish elder has died, an important man. His will requests 3 dozen wax candles at his vigil. No tallow, only beeswax. You and your master spend hours arranging them, 6 on each side of the coffin, 2 at the head, and a ring around the altar. As dusk falls, mourners enter the church. You are told to stay behind, but you linger at the side door. From there, you watch the glow of your handiwork dance across stone and stained glass. Each flame flickers, as if remembering something, a laugh, a word, a life now gone. You've lit rooms for births, for weddings, for council meetings. But never have you seen light behave like this, quiet, reverent, ancient. It occurs to you that a candle is the most human of objects, short-lived, shaped by breath, vanishing into air. The master's illness that spring. Your master falls ill. At first, it is a cough, then fevers. He speaks less, and his hands tremble when lifting pots. The work does not stop. You take on more duties, ordering wax, settling accounts, inspecting wick deliveries from the cooper. The other apprentices look to you now. One day, he does not rise from bed. His wife brings you the keys to the ledger. He wants you to manage things, she says, at least until he's better. You nod. But you both know, he will not be better. By midsummer, he's gone. Buried with a single beeswax taper. Just like he asked, you don't cry. Instead, you scrub the dipping troughs until your fingers bleed. Inheritance of a Sorther is no will. You are not family. Legally, the shop belongs to the master's widow, but she cannot run it alone. Quietly, she begins to rely on you. You know the accounts, she says. The parish trusts you. I've no sons old enough. You work long days and longer nights. There are moments you feel like a ghost, walking through the memory of someone else's life. His tools, his ledger, his name on the wax press. But slowly, the work becomes yours. You stamp your own mark, 3 lines and the flame. You redesign the front window. You hire a new apprentice. And when people say, the candle maker, they mean you. You have not inherited land, or wealth, or title. You have inherited a trade, a life of light and grease and silence. And somehow, it fits you. A life measured in hours burnage years pass. Your hands grow thick. Your back stoops slightly from lifting barrels. But your work becomes known, not far and wide, but deeply. The Abbey orders only your wax. The mayor's household requests your tallow chandlers. A visiting merchant once calls your altar tapers as clean as Flemish silk. You smile politely, though you know silk has nothing to do with it. Sometimes, you think about the math of it all. Each candle burns for 4 hours. Each day, the shop makes nearly 200. That's 800 hours of light a day. Every day to 292,000 hours a year. That is your life, measured not in years, but in FIOELIGHT. And yet, you've never really asked the question, what have you been lighting all this time? The girl with the wax stained hands. An evening, a young girl comes to the shop, asking for scraps, old wax ends. Her hands are stained with soot and ink. You recognize her, the bookbinder's niece. She's clever, always borrowing tallow bits to seal scrolls. You give her a small lump of clean wax. She hesitates. You don't want payment. She asks, not today. She returns the next week with a folded pamphlet, handbound. It contains verses. Not poetry exactly, but short tales, reflections. One is about a candle maker who loses his way in a dark cellar and must trust the flame to find his path. You read it by lantern light. Then again. It is not about you. And yet, it is. You save it in your drawer, beside the wax knife and ledger key. New candles, old wicks. One your youngest apprentice, a quiet boy named Tom, burns himself during a rushlight batch. He does not cry. He simply looks to you. You teach him the bomb trick, crushed calendula and tallow. Your master once taught you the same. Tom will one day become a candle maker, or perhaps something else. You cannot see that far, but you know what it means to hand down a trade. To teach someone how to read wax, the way others read books. To know the value of a clean burn. A dark night, a quiet thought. Years later, you sit alone on a winter night. The shutters rattle, the fire has gone cold. A single beeswax taper burns beside you. You hold a worn journal, one of many you've kept. Each page contains not poetry, not sermons, not politics. Just records, notes, recipes for wick stiffness, measurements for barrel lie, days wax went missing, names of boys who left the trade, and one who stayed. You flip to the last page. You've written something odd. Light does not belong to the candle. It only passes through. You don't remember when you wrote it, but you stare at it now, watching the candle's tiny flame ripple in the draft. Final reflections. You've spent a life in the shadows of others, priests, nobles, merchants, all of them made luminous by your work. And yet, as your own hands begin to tremble with age, you realize the candle never sees its own glow. But that does not mean it was not bright. Your candles have lit births and deaths, weddings and wakes, feasts and fasts. They have seen arguments, prayers, stolen kisses, final breaths. You may not be named in any book, but your hands, your craft, your quiet light, they've burned in the background of history, steady and unnoticed. And maybe that was the point all along. The salt that saved the winter cold has come early this year. You notice it first, in the way the ground stiffens under your feet as you walk to the pig pen. Not just damp, but frozen. Your mother mentions it without alarm, but your father's brow furrows. He looks at the sky with a particular stillness and says only, it's too soon. It is late September, and the frost should not yet have arrived. But there it is, biting at the grass, clinging to the roof thatch, crisping the morning breath of the hens. You are 10 years old enough to understand that cold is not just cold. It is hunger, creeping in advance. Your village, a collection of 27 souls and 6 chimneys, rests beside the fens in eastern England. Fish is common, wood is not, salt is precious. And winter, the real winter, is a test of planning, fortune, and whether your pickling barrels were full enough by All Hallows. A white rock more valuable than silver to you. Salt is salt. A sharp taste on boiled greens, or a gritty edge on the cured herring you often eat for supper. But in your father's world, salt is time. It is survival. It turns meat from fleeting into eternal, from decay into rations. Without it, you are left to the whims of spoilage and wind. The church priest, Father Aldwine, once told you, salt was once so rare they paid soldiers with it. You thought he was joking. But then you watched your father trade a half-wheel of dried cheese and to rabbits for a single sack of rough, greyish salt. Enough, he said, for one pig, or maybe half a cow. This is not the clean salt you've seen on the Lord's table during the manna feast. That salt comes in cubes, fine and white, kept in tiny dishes carved from horn. The salt your family uses is crude and heavy. It clumps in damp weather. Sometimes it smells faintly of seaweed or smoke, but it keeps food from rotting. That is enough. Slaughter season when the frost comes early. Plans must change. Animals must be slaughtered before they eat too much winter feed. But after they've fattened enough to be worth the loss. It is a narrow window. And this year, the window is closing early. The village convenes. Decisions are made quickly and without ceremony. You will kill one pig and 2 chickens. The neighbour across the lane will slaughter a lamb. The widow with the goose plans to wait another fortnight. Her salt stores are too low. Slaughter day is not a spectacle. It is necessity. You do not watch, but you help after. Holding buckets, scraping hides, collecting scraps. Your hands stink of blood and straw 4 hours, but your father pats your shoulder. You'll need to know, he says. Once the meat is sectioned, the real work begins. Curing. The curing shed. It is a lean-to made of scrap wood and thatch, dark and cold even at noon. Inside, barrels line the wall, some filled with fish, others still empty. You help your father rub coarse salt into the slabs of pork. The salt draws out moisture, turning pink meat into stiff, pale flesh. You wrap it in cloth, then layer more salt. Then wrap again. It is tedious, repetitive, cold work, but you learn. The salt burns your cuts. It dries your knuckles until they crack, but your father reminds you, if the meat turns, there is no more. What cannot be salted must be eaten quickly, or boiled to a pulp and stored in earthen pots, sealed with fat. As the days grow shorter, the shed fills with the acrid smell of salt and meat. You begin to recognize it not as unpleasant, but as comforting. It means you will eat in January. The salt man cometh once a month. If the roads are passable, the salt man comes. He is not truly a salt merchant. He sells other goods, pitch, wax, dried beans. But everyone calls him salt man, because that is the only thing people care about in winter. He arrives with a small cart, drawn by a bony mare. His face is wine-chapped, his boots thick with mud. He doesn't speak much, but he listens. People gather around the cart, making offers. Cloth, ale, eggs, even favours. The salt is expensive, not by coin, but by barter. He opens a wooden chest and reveals bricks of brownish salt wrapped in linen. You can smell it before you see it. Your father trades to wooden bowls he carved. During the long evenings, he receives a small bundle, not much, but enough to stretch through February, maybe March. As the salt man leaves, your father watches the horizon and mutters, "That's the last time we'll see him this year." The hunger just behind you. The salted meat is stacked in the shed. The beans are dried. The flour is sealed in its stone bean. But you sense the tension anyway. The way your mother counts the apples in storage. The way your father listens to the chickens at night. You learn that survival is not one thing. It is 1,000 tiny calculations. If a storm comes and the roof leaks, the grain spoils. If the salted meat turns, there is no replacing it. If someone falls ill, broth must be made, using up the few precious onions. Everything is fragile. You begin to notice how often salt is mentioned, in jokes, in prayers. Even in the old stories your grandfather tells, sailors with salted tongues, brides given salt cellars as dowries, villages cursed with endless snow, and no salt to survive it. You ask him once, what did people do before salt? He shrugs, they died. A missing sack, then one morning, it happens, a sack is gone. The one behind the barrels in the shed, the emergency supply. Your father tears the shed apart, but it's gone. He accuses no one aloud, but you see the thoughts behind his eyes. Could it have been stolen? Perhaps by the hungry widow, or a traveller, or a rat, a terrible, unbelievable loss, but not impossible. Your father goes quiet 4 days. He checks the barrels twice daily now. You begin skipping your morning broth so others can eat. Salt is not just flavour. It is security. Its absence feels like a door left open during a storm. Waiting for Snowby. Mid-November. The snow has not yet come, but the cold has deepened. Each breath is visible. The hens lay few eggs. You wear 2 layers even inside. Meals become plainer, more porridge, fewer meats. A bit of dried fish crumbled into soup. You wonder, will the salt last? You dream of the sack that went missing. You wonder who took it, or if your father used it and forgot, or if some ancient mouse chewed a hole through time. But you do not ask. Questions cost energy. Energy costs warmth. And warmth, like salt, is in short supply. Closing the shed. Your father nails shut the curing shed 1 week before Christmas. The salted meat is stored elsewhere now, safer, he says. You wonder if someone will try again to steal. You wonder if it will be you. The firewood stack is half what it should be. The bread is thinner, but the salt is still holding, barely. You've begun to understand something new. Salt isn't just what keeps food from spoiling. It's what keeps people from spoiling, too. But the snow is coming, and you are not sure the salt will hold through the thaw. The snow came on a Tuesday, just after the sun had gone down. It was light at first, a few drifting flakes that settled on the windowsill and vanished. But by morning, the village was silent, under a white shroud, and you knew that winter had properly begun. Everything smelled different, cleaner, drier, stiller. The kind of stillness that makes sound itself hesitate. No one walks far in snow like this. Not if they can help it. Paths vanish. Ditches hide under deceptive whiteness. You can get turned around, walking from the pig pen to the churchyard, which is why it was so strange to see the footprints. They began at the edge of the woods and made a slow curve around the back of the curing shed. The very one your father had nailed shut last week. One set, deep, narrow, too small to be your father's, too long to be yours. The salt was already gone by then. But now it was clear. Someone had been there. The widow and the barrel that morning. Your father didn't say anything about the tracks. He only leaned against the side of the house, with a face as blank as frost. He watched the tree line. At midday. He took a half loaf of bread, wrapped it in cloth, and told you to come along. You followed the sound of your boots crunching in the snow until you reached the widow's house. Her name was Tilda. Her roof was sagging and black with damp, and she hadn't had a husband since you were a baby. Some said she had 3 grown sons who died in the last harvest sickness. Others said they'd run off to London to escape her sour mouth. You didn't know the truth, but you knew she hadn't been seen at the last church gathering, and no smoke came from her chimney. Your father knocked. No answer. He knocked again. Then the door opened, and the smell of fish and vinegar crept out. The room behind her was dark, 1 candle lit. A single goose sat, head tucked into its feathers. Inside the hearth, where no fire burned, she stared at your father, then glanced at you. Her lips were chapped, her eyes sunken. Without a word, your father handed her the bread. She took it, closed the door. On the walk back, your father finally said it aloud. She's the one who took it. You wanted to ask how he knew, what he'd do, but you didn't. because you already knew the answer. Nothing. Salt for silent seeth at night. You lay awake listening to the wind. It moaned under the eaves and whistled across the wooden shutters like a song played for no one. The fire had long since burned down. Only a few coals remained. But still, no one moved to add wood. There wasn't enough to waste on dreams. You turned on your side and thought about the widow, about the footprints, about the sack of salt. You wondered what she'd done with it, if she'd used it all already, if she was using it slowly, grain by grain, saving her goose piece by piece, if it had saved her life already. You were angry, but you didn't hate her, because you understood something you hadn't before. The theft hadn't been for a hunger. It had been for silence. If she had begged, if she had asked, she would have been told no, or worse, made to kneel and weep. In front of the priest, her shame used to warn others. Instead, she had acted, not loudly, not cruelly, just quietly, at night, with snow in the air and desperation in her belly. She had chosen to live. The salt lost following Sunday. Father Aldwin read from the scroll of scripture this time, but the salt law, you'd forgotten it even existed. It was part of the manorial code, written in Latin and English, passed down from the old steward's father. The law declared salt to be a community asset in time of declared hardship. Theft of salt, even from private holdings, could be punishable by whipping or exile, or in some cases, seizure of livestock. Your father stared straight ahead, not blinking. He did not report the widow. Neither did anyone else. It was at mercy. Exactly. Nor was it kindness. It was something more resigned. Everyone in the room, even the plump merchant's son in his clean wool coat, knew that they might be next. The salt law was meant to discourage desperation. But desperation, as you were learning, had a way of rewriting laws with actions. Instead of ink, the salt jar on the Lord's table. A week later, you were called up to the manor house with your father. A broken yoke needed repair, and he was the only man in the village who still had a good awl and steady hands. While he worked, you were left to wait in the main hall. A fire blazed in the hearth. Thick rugs covered the stone floor, and on the long oak table at the far end, nestled between two brass candlesticks, sat a small jar, white ceramic, glazed and unchipped. Inside, you saw it. Salt. Clean, fine, white, the kind you'd once licked from the edge of a feast dish when you were 6. It shimmered in the candlelight. You walked closer and stared. Not touched, just stared. A servant entered. You startled, afraid you'd be accused, but she only looked at the jar and said, almost casually, "They import it from France now. Costs more than wool." Then she left. You stood there for a long time afterward, just watching the salt. That much salt. Enough to last your entire family for 3 winters. Sitting in a jar, barely touched. You realized then, this winter, someone would die. But it wouldn't be the steward. A thaw, a rot. A lesson. Be late January. The snow softened, dripped from the roofs, pooled on the frozen earth in muddy puddles that refused to drain. It was not a real thaw, not yet, but enough to ruin the shed roof and spoil 2 of the meat barrels. Your father didn't speak when he opened the lid and smelled the rot. Just closed it again and said, "Not fit for dogs." It wasn't. Just yours. The neighbors lost some too. A boy came down with fever. A cow miscarried. The thaw was supposed to mean relief, but it came with sickness. You remembered something the salt man once said. Years ago, mold waits like a thief under your door. Let the cold rise even a little, and it crawls in. Salt could not stop mold. Not once moisture returned. You had lost enough now that meals had to stretch even thinner. Sometimes just boiled oats and water with a pinch of dried nettle. But your father didn't give up. He mixed the old salts with new ash, rewrapped what could be saved, resealed the bins. He said nothing, but his hands worked until the skin bled. You knew then, this winter, you would survive, just barely. The return of the salt man. It was nearly Lent when the salt man returned. No one expected him. He arrived just after sunrise, his cart caked in grey mud, his hands trembling with cold. He said nothing of where he'd been, just opened the box and revealed a single block of salt, packed in cloth. People rushed to trade: chickens, candles, shoes, a jar of pickled turnips. Your father traded a piece of carved bone, a comb he'd made for your mother years ago. You saw him hesitate before letting it go, but he did. The salt man said nothing, just handed over the salt. It was smaller than before, but cleaner. This time, you'd keep it indoors. A question of weight at night. Your father took the new salt and weighed it against the old clay measures. He said it was light, too light. A trick of the salt man, perhaps. Or maybe just drier than usual. Either way, it would have to last. You sat by the fire, chewing a crust of bread, too tough for your teeth, and watched your mother portion the salt into a new jar, smaller, sealed with wax. You wondered, had it always been this much trouble? Had the world always hinged on a rock that burned your tongue and disappeared into the air? And why, if it was so essential, did it still feel like something borrowed, like luck, not birthright? The widow's visitor one evening, just before the equinox, she came. The widow. She knocked on your door and waited. She looked thinner, but not dead. Her eyes were brighter than you remembered. She handed your mother a small bundle, cloth wrapped. Inside were dried goose feathers, a carved spoon, and something heavier, a lump of salt. Unmistakable. She said. Nothing. Your mother nodded. Your father said, "Thank you," and that was it. The salt came back, but not all of it. And somehow, that felt right. Somewhere deep in the cold earth, the barrels still sit, preserved, measured, guarded by nails and frost and memory. But you still wonder, what would have happened if the saltman never came back? And what happens next winter, when the salt is gone, and the people who remember how to make it are gone too? Spring arrived, but not with trumpets. It crept in quietly, in the soft dripping of thaw water from the thatch, in the sudden brightness of dandelions beside the road, in the way you no longer saw your breath in the morning. No one celebrated. They were too busy repairing. The village had survived the winter, but it hadn't done so without wounds. Salt had preserved the food, but it could not preserve the people entirely. You'd lost 3 neighbors, an older couple, too frail to eat what little they had, and a boy who'd taken a fever in February and never woke again. Others had lost teeth, some toes. Your mother had a cough now that she couldn't shake. Your father's hands didn't hold warmth like they once had, but you were still here, and so was the salt. The counting steward came in April. He arrived with his riding coat and a new tally sheet, one that crunched beneath his gloves as he unrolled it beside the chapel wall. He counted grain, chickens, hides, and then, at the bottom, in careful Latin letters, he asked for the salt registry. Your father produced it, a small bound book, scarcely filled, a ledger kept not by law, but by custom. Inside were the names of each family, the amount of salt used, remaining stores, trades made. The steward raised his brows. Surprisingly thorough, he said. Your father nodded, but said nothing. Then the steward asked, "Did you ration or receive additional shipment?" Your father told the truth. About the widow, about the theft, about the return, about the trade for the new block in March. The steward said nothing for a long while. Then finally, "The Lord will not punish her." You didn't know if that meant your manor lord, or the one in heaven. But either way, it seemed to be the end of it. The ledger was signed. The steward mounted his horse. He rode away into a mist of pollen and clouds, and you were left with the ashes of winter and the breath of green shoots rising again, salted wound meat that had spoiled in January. It had left a smell that never quite faded. Even after the barrels were hauled out, split, burned, even after Snowmop rinsed the yard and your mother scrubbed the boards with vinegar and broom, it was the smell of decay. Not death, decay. Death, as you'd learned, could be clean. Salt made sure of that. But decay, that lingered, that stained. That spring, when you dug new rows for turnips and shallots, the soil was sour, earthworms had vanished, the rot had seeped into the ground and stayed. You had to dig twice as deep to find soft dirt. Sometimes you unearthed bits of bone, grey with mould. The winter had passed, but its fingerprints were still everywhere. Salted words. The priest gave a sermon in May. He spoke of Lot's wife, turned to salt for looking backward. He spoke of Jesus, telling his followers, "Ye are the salt of the earth." And then he told a story, not from the Bible, but one you knew well. He told the story of a woman who had stolen salt from the village stock. A widow, alone, desperate. He did not name her. But everyone knew, and yet he did not condemn. She acted not out of greed, he said, but in the instinct of the living to stay alive. She sinned, yes, but so do we all, when we forget that even the smallest grain may save a soul. It was the closest thing to forgiveness anyone would get. And it was enough. The salt macaron day in early June. You found yourself beside the blacksmith's forge, watching him sharpen a scythe for the hay cut. The smith's son, a boy of about 20, was fanning the coals. You heard them talking, not loudly, just voices carried on the smoke. Old man Abel knew how to make it. The smith was saying, "Salt, out by the coast, pulled it from the sea and boiled it till the pond cracked." The son asked, "Why don't we do that?" The smith spat into the dirt. "Takes time, fire, wood, big flat pans. No one has that now. And the manor doesn't pay for it." The son was quiet for a while. "Then, we could learn." The smith shook his head. "By the time we do, the next famine will be on us." "That evening, you told your father." He nodded slowly. "I knew men like that. In my youth, down in Norfolk, sea salt men. All gone now." You realized something, then. The people who made salt a real salt, from scratch, they were dying out. And when they were gone, salt would become something foreign, something bought, something controlled, something you might one day kill for. A summer feast. Midsummer brought its usual feast. Thin, this year. No wine, no goose, just barley cakes and early cabbage. But the sun shone, and for the first time, children played in the open without coughing, and on every table, set beside the rough bread and dried beans, was a single small dish. Salt. Not much. Not enough to waste, but a pinch, just a pinch, so that everyone could taste it. It felt like wealth. It felt like memory. You saw the widow, sitting alone by the edge of the green, holding her dish between her fingers. She didn't eat, just looked down at the salt, then up at the sky. Then she smiled, and you knew she would survive another year. When the salt ran out, it didn't happen that year, nor the one after, but one day, it did. You were older. Your father had passed. You were the one keeping the ledger now, the barrels, the jars. The trade slips. The salt man had not returned in 2 years. The new steward didn't import. Said it wasn't cost efficient. No one had gone to the coast in months. And the last sack, a small, greyish lump, sat at the bottom of a cracked clay bowl. You held it in your hand, weighed it, thought about rationing. And then, without knowing why, you took a pinch and scattered it into the fire. The flames hissed. A white spark rose. Gone. You smiled, and said aloud, "We'll make more," not as a question, as a promise, reflection. The salt beneath the skin. Salt has never been merely a seasoning. In Tudor England, it was survival, courtesy, boundary, faith. It preserved the flesh, both dead and living. It marked who would endure the frost and who would fade into the earth. The people of your village, your family, your neighbors, even the thief, all orbited around this silent mineral, measuring their choices by its weight. It did not forgive. It did not explain. It merely preserved what could be preserved, and let rot the rest. But in its silent grain, there was a kind of memory, one that passed down through hands and hunger, one that still sits on your table today. Perhaps, even now, we are all still licking the edge of survival, tasting salt and calling it civilization. The candle tax, light and darkness in Georgian Britain. You may not think about it often, but when you reach for a light switch, you're performing a small miracle, one that your ancestors could never have imagined. A clean, bright room at any hour, a steady bulb humming overhead, or the blue glow of a screen lighting your way through the dark. But for a large part of history, light came only in flickers. It was expensive, smoky, short-lived. And in 18th century Britain, even that flickering flame was taxed. So let's go back, not to a war or a famous invention, but to a far more ordinary and, therefore more human problem. How do you afford the dark? A light in the window imaging, standing in a narrow London street in the year 1780. It is winter. The sun sets early and without ceremony. Shadows crowd the alleys, and you clutch your shawl tighter as you pass shuttered windows. Few have candles burning at this hour. You might see one flickering in the window of a wealthier home, warm, yellow, steady. But most homes are dark. If someone is home, they may be sitting near the hearth, the fire reduced to its last embers, with one stubborn tallow candle guttering on a stool. Perhaps a child is doing stitching by it, holding the cloth dangerously close just to see the thread. This is not because people preferred the dark. It is because the dark was cheaper. What was the candle tax? In 1709, under Queen Anne, the British Parliament introduced a tax on candles. It was part of a growing list of excise duties, taxes placed on everyday goods like salt, beer, soap, and leather. Candles, after all, were universal. Everyone used them. The tax did not apply to simply owning candles. Rather, it taxed manufacture of candle, selling of candles, licensing for candle makers, candle making materials like tallow and wax. In essence, you couldn't legally make or sell candles without a license. If you wanted to melt your own tallow and pour it into molds at home, that, too, was taxed. Doing it without permission could lead to fines or even imprisonment. The government appointed inspectors, known as candlemongers, who were authorized to search homes and workshops for illicit candles. These men could enter your home, rummage through your cupboards, and fine you for making light without a license. It was the kind of bureaucracy that would be comic if it weren't so dimly lit. Tallow versus wax. There were two kinds of candles, tallow and wax. Tallow candles were made from animal fat, mostly sheep or cows. They were cheap, dirty, and smelled faintly of meat when burned. The smoke could sting your eyes, and they dripped heavily. Wax candles were made from beeswax. These burned cleaner, brighter, and longer, but they were expensive, so expensive, in fact, that most people never even saw one up close. The candle tax applied to both, but it disproportionately hurt the poor, who could only afford tallow. So, like many things in history, the candle tax was regressive. The rich continued to burn wax candles with no real concern, while the poor had to choose between light and food. A family evening without candles. Picture a working-class household in Yorkshire, about the year 1762. A weaver's cottage. Stone walls, one window, and a fireplace. The family has 6 mouths to feed. Candles, though, are strictly rationed. The family might light a single tallow candle in the evening and keep it burning only while meals are prepared. After that, it's snuffed out. The children sit in the near dark, perhaps warmed by the fire if it's been a good week for cloth orders. The adults might mend, spin, or simply talk, but they do not read. Reading by candlelight was a privilege of the middle class, and even they did it sparingly. If someone needed to leave the room to fetch water or visit the privy, they would borrow the candle briefly, shielding the flame with a cupped hand, praying the draught wouldn't kill it. Matches weren't common. Relighting a candle wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a cost. Illicit candle making in response to the tax. Many people began making their own candles illegally. This meant collecting animal fat from the kitchen, leftover drippings, mutton suet, or bacon grease, and rendering it in small pots. They dip cotton wicks or pour the fat into old molds, sometimes using paper to shape the candle if no proper tools were available. because this was technically a taxable activity. It had to be done in secret. In rural areas, it might mean making candles at night, in a locked shed, hoping no one reported you. In cities, it meant hiding the materials altogether. Imagine the irony, making candles at night. In the dark, the watchmen and the inspectors. Candle inspectors were not popular. Sometimes paid by the number of infractions they uncovered. They were incentivized to be overzealous. There are records of inspectors raiding cottages, accusing widows of illegal tallow use, or fining journeymen for possessing candle molds without a license. Some families would hire their candles, much like alcohol during Prohibition in the US. A century later, others disguised tallow as kitchen waste or claimed the candles had been bought second-hand. As a result, the tax not only punished poverty, it also made people suspicious. It turned ordinary families into lawbreakers, simply for wanting a little more time to sew a shirt or read a letter after sunset. Alternatives to light without affordable candles. People found creative or desperate alternatives. Rushlights. Dried rushes dipped in fat. They burned fast and unevenly, often with more smoke than light, but they were cheap and not taxed. Firelight. Sitting close to the hearth for warmth and glow, though it required keeping wood burning, another expense. Moonlight. Activities were scheduled around the phases of the moon. A full moon meant more could be done outside. Even at night. Nothing. Often, people simply did without. Once the sun went down, the day was over. Time itself was shaped by the light people could afford. A poor family's evening might be only an hour long. The rest was sleep, or waiting for morning. A tax on time. It's easy to think of the candle tax as just another odd historical footnote. But in truth, it was a tax on time, on evening hours, on productivity, on reading, prayer, conversation, intimacy. It made daylight the only free time most people had, and it reminded everyone, daily, of their place in the hierarchy, because you could always tell who had money by who could afford to stay awake after dark. A small rebellion. There's an old tale from a Devon village, half folklore, half fact, about a woman who ran a secret candle ring in the 1740s. She would collect tallow from neighbors and make candles in her barn. In exchange, she asked only for help tending her goats. The village knew, of course, but no one ever reported her. Eventually, a candle inspector did arrive. He found no molds, no supplies, and only one sad candle on the table. The barn was empty. It was later discovered that the entire village had coordinated to hide her operation, dousing all candles, removing all trace, lighting only rushlights the night before. The inspector fined one man for impeding his duties. The woman kept making candles. As we dim the light on this part of the story, one question flickers quietly. What would you choose, the law or the flame? If you were a working-class woman in 18th century Britain, say, a spinner in Norwich, or a fishwife in Bristol, the candle tax wasn't some abstract policy debated by Parliament. It was the reason your evenings ended early. It shaped how long your children studied, whether your husband could continue his wood carving after supper, and if you dared read a Bible passage aloud at night. But this wasn't just about domestic discomfort. The candle tax crept its way into every crevice of British life, influencing education, crime, labour patterns, and the very notion of time. The tax that robbed the clock. The 1750s. Britain was on the cusp of industrial revolution. Factories had begun humming in the northern towns, but work and productivity still largely followed daylight. The candle tax made extending the workday difficult. In rural areas, this meant that spinning, weaving, and other cottage industries often stopped once the sun went down. Hiring candles for labor, literally a line item in some bookkeeping, became a symbol of industrial investment. Some employers provided them, but many didn't, and so time remained rationed. In larger towns, the richer factories could afford lighting, giving them a competitive advantage. The poor, even if they wanted to work longer, simply couldn't see, What they were doing. It's hard to imagine today, a world where access to light dictated whether or not you could work. Night is a dangerous time in cities, especially in London. The candle tax had another consequence. It helped preserve the night as a time of danger. Without widespread lighting, streets were dark, gas lamps had not yet been introduced, and oil lamps were too expensive to be common. Candles were rarely used outdoors. They'd blow out in the wind or melt before you reached your destination. So people hurried home before sunset. Night belonged to the desperate. Crime rates rose during winter months, when darkness came early and hung thick over alleys. Muggings, assaults, and thefts were all more common after sundown, and without decent lighting, it was almost impossible to identify or pursue a criminal. Some households kept dogs. Others avoided leaving the house entirely, and there was always the subtle fear of being mistaken for a thief simply for walking too quietly. The dark became something to fear, not just physically, but socially. It was associated with lawlessness, poverty, and the unknown. Candles and literacy. Now imagine being a child in 1760, learning to read. Perhaps you had a Bible or a chapbook with moral tales. You wanted to practice your letters in the evening, but your family could not afford a candle. Schooling often happened in the daytime, and even when literacy was encouraged, it was difficult to maintain without light to read or write in the evenings. For working children, of which there were many, the only time to learn was after work, and that time was in the dark. So the candle tax became, indirectly, a tax on literacy. Letters were short, reading was rushed, writing was clumsy, often done at the kitchen table with poor light or none at all. Even prayers, typically read before bed, were sometimes done by memory rather than text. In the middle and upper classes, literacy grew steadily. Books became more available, printing spread, but for the lower classes, the candle tax was another small wall keeping knowledge just out of reach. Hospitals, churches, and public space tax didn't just affect homes. Public institutions, hospitals, churches, and workhouses also had to account for lighting costs, and most chose to be conservative. Hospital wards, for example, were often dimly lit or dark at night. Doctors made rounds by lanterns or individual candles. This affected patient care. Wounds went unexamined, fevers unchecked, and records miswritten. Churches, too, held fewer nighttime services or community meetings. Some parishes added levies to raise money for candles in winter months, but in poorer districts, the pews sat empty in the evening. Imagine attending a funeral by twilight, with only a few sputtering candles near the pulpit. The ceremony rushed, the scripture barely visible. And workhouses, the places meant to house the poor, were notoriously stingy with lighting. Darkness reinforced discipline. It was easier to control people when they couldn't see well enough to gather or read or plan. Light and class. In homes across Britain, light became a symbol of class. You could tell a person's status by their candle usage. The poor might light one candle per evening, often sharing it across rooms. The lower middle class might light 2 or 3. The wealthy had chandeliers, sconces, and candelabras, not for function, but for display. Visitors to country homes often wrote admiringly of rooms ablaze with wax, not just illuminated. Ablaze, candles were not merely useful. They were decorative, symbolic, and extravagant. Some upper-class families even employed link boys, young boys who would carry torches ahead of them through the streets at night. A literal demonstration of lighting one's own way. Meanwhile, the poor walked in darkness, sometimes with rushlights, often with nothing. The repeal of the candle tax by the late 18th century. The candle tax was increasingly unpopular. Reformers argued that it punished the poor and discouraged productivity. It was widely evaded and costly to enforce. The presence of excise officers in homes was resented, a violation of privacy in service of bureaucracy. Finally, in 1831, under Lord Grey's government, the candle tax was abolished. Newspapers at the time welcomed the decision, calling it a relief for the industrious poor. Light, finally, was no longer rationed by Parliament. But the change didn't happen overnight. Habits remained. Many families had lived 4 generations under the assumption that candles were precious, to be saved, counted, and shared. Even into the 1840s and 50s, older generations would admonish children for wasting light, a leftover fear from decades of taxation. An echo through time. There's something oddly poetic about taxing light. Unlike bread, or beer or coal, it's intangible, a means, not an end. You tax a candle, and what you're really taxing is possibility, the chance to read, to work, to sit together and talk, the opportunity to stretch the day a little longer. The candle tax didn't just shape evenings, it shaped memory. Entire generations lived with the instinct that light was expensive, that the dark was natural, and that staying awake late was a luxury. And perhaps, in a small way, that's still with us. You may not hesitate to flip a light switch, but somewhere, in the far back corners of your family tree, someone once chose to go to bed early, not because they were tired, but because the candle had burned too low. But even as Britain stepped into the light, another question loomed. What came next? And did the new forms of light bring with them a new kind of darkness?